time at the end. Um, so this webinar is especially timely. With the NACE conference next week, there are so many discussions that'll be taking place on the tactics, trends, best practices around early career programs. But to really get the most out of those discussions and candidly to protect early career programs, one topic is becoming really, really important. How are those in the C-suite, those other executives, thinking about early career talent right now? And again, that's part of the reason why this discussion right now is so important. Early career programs, including internships, are respected but not protected. And to be honest, in some cases, the early career hires aren't even respected. Internships we know are top of mind, especially given a lot of them are starting right now, and there's so much data. But these internship programs are also the most at risk for some of the reasons we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to hit on is how to not just protect those programs and do it in a way that's not about getting budget or volume of hires, but it's a bigger issue. It's making sure we have the proverbial seat at the table when decisions around early career programs are being made. So during this discussion, we're going to share some insights, some examples, some action items, but they're not meant to be answers. There's no silver bullet because every organization is different. But hopefully some of these questions and insights will really help position you and your program to be key strategic imperative for those organizations. And for those of you who will be in Denver next week at NACE, they can provide a really valuable lens to get the most out of the sessions and the discussions to bring back to your organizations. The things that will excite the CHROs, the TA leaders, and the other executives. So let's start with what's going on. We are all getting inundated with news, especially those in the C-suite, which is creating a real threat. As I said, a lot of leaders believe conceptually around the importance of early career programs, but there's so many pressures that aren't protecting the budget. AI is changing assumptions about what entry-level work means. There's a ton of economic uncertainty, which is forcing scrutiny on budgets. Hiring managers are getting frustrated by perceived gaps in job readiness. Early career hiring needs are shifted, and in some cases, there's media and other narratives suggesting or questioning whether we even need entry-level roles, internships, or individuals with degrees. Now, the issue is not whether early career programs and summer internships are good. I think everyone on this call believes they are. The issue is whether we can prove that we're driving better business outcomes than the alternatives. Now, to be clear, a lot of this stuff looks like doom and gloom. It's not. I actually think it is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for all of us. Everything going on makes it vital for the early career leaders to be at the table. We're the ones who can help the C-suite answer the questions that they have as they're trying to figure out those long-term strategies and deal with the short-term pressures, whether it's expenses or otherwise. So talking about conversion rate or applicant volume won't get us to the table or keep us in the room where the decisions are being made. And this is something I can talk to, sort of given my background firsthand. So for those of you who don't know me, just really quickly, before starting Parker Dewey a decade ago, I spent about 20 years as a venture investor and in finance. I was working closely with the C-suite on these kinds of decisions. And again, I want to be very clear. I wasn't always the one making the decisions or sometimes even influencing them, especially early in my career. But I was fortunate to be in the room. I was in the room as the CEOs were discussing human capital planning as the dot-com boom was taking place in the late 90s, as CFOs were talking about massive program cuts and expense issues when the dot-com bust happened thereafter, as the CHROs were designing organizational charts to really support the hypergrowth that was taking place because of our investments, and really even as the emergence of the gig economy was driving some really interesting discussions with TA leaders about how many employees they need and what can be outsourced. So every now and then when I see some of these discussions, it sort of pushes me back into that old mindset. And I think one great example is when NACE released some data around the 63% conversion metric from intern to hires. And again, this is a metric we're going to dive into a bit more as we go in. Or when we see data showing that hiring managers are frustrated with recent grads And again, this is especially concerning given all of the pressures I mentioned before. But what really shocked me was a great report from Yellow, where it showed that only 6% of recruiters are prioritizing improving the quality of their hires, while over 50% are still focused on conversion. And again, this really scared me for a number of reasons, including that it's not actually what matters to the executives. The CEOs, the CFOs, the CHRs aren't asking about conversion rate. They're not asking about number of applicants. They're not reading the research from NACE. What they are doing is reading the research from Harvard and Gartner, and for the CHROs from SHRM. They're dealing with strategic questions around the quality of the workforce, how organizational design is going to change because of AI, if they're making the right hires for the future and doing so in a way that drives strong ROI. So while within the early career programs, we're talking about the tactics and we're talking about those metrics, again, conversion rate, offer rate, applicants, to really be part of that conversation, to be at the table, we need to think like the C-suite is. So what does the C-suite want to know? There's three general areas that we're going to cover. How are our early career programs performing today? Not just relative to peers, but relative to the corporate goals. By the way, this unfortunately includes if we even need those programs. What needs to change given all of these dynamics that we're facing? And do we as an organization have the ability, the systems, and the mindset to respond? So let's go into each of these. The first real question is, how are our programs performing? Is it aligned to the corporate goals? So me being a finance guy, I'm going to use an ROI calculation. In the numerator, and sorry to bring us all back to math class, in the numerator is really the effectiveness of our program. This is measured by things like the quality of hire. How are they performing? Do they have the right skills? It's not about volume or clicks or engagement. Again, all of those are important for tactical decisions. The C-suite doesn't care. What they care about is the current value the new hires are bringing, how quickly they bring it, and if they have the potential to be successful long term. And one example of how serious this is, McKinsey, which is largely considered to be one of the top firms related to the quality of their human talent, spent several years doing an analysis of the leading indicators of who will make partner. Again, things that they can understand about college students when they're hiring. Not just, again, make partner, not just 1 year retention. And again, making partner, by the way, is a 10-year path, but they are focused on who is actually going to progress to firm leadership. What are the leading indicators we can find when we're hiring from college of who are going to be our next managing directors? This is a big deal. On the denominator is cost. Again, how much we're spending. There's the obvious costs, again, things like travel and hosting events, but there's also those indirect costs, the management oversight, the time. And this is really a great segue to something right now, given the summer interns are starting, and back to the 63%, the cost of having internships. Do we even need those summer internship programs? And I want to be crystal clear. I am a huge believer in summer internships. I think we need them. As folks have heard me say, I think what we do here is not a replacement for summer internships, but a complement. But I am genuinely worried as I see the case being made because it just hasn't been compelling. So again, let's start with one example of this ROI calculation on the cost side tied to these summer internships. And I'm going to use that 63% conversion metric we talked about and some other averages that NACE reports. Again, $23 an hour salary for summer interns, 8-week period, and again, the conversion metrics that NACE shared. By the way, I'm happy to share this spreadsheet with anyone who asks. Again, put in your own numbers, plug in your own data, and see how it comes out. I'm pretty sure your CFO is. And when we look at the pure comparison associated with hiring a former intern versus making a direct hire, from a purely financial perspective, it's pretty hard to see the benefit. It's something like a 250% cost premium. But when I brought this up to someone, the immediate response was, well, the retention rate is better when we have former interns, and it 100% is. So let's include that. Let's look at the fact that former interns, again, stay longer, both at a 1 year level, but also a 5. even considering this, we're still looking at more than a 2x cost per hire in that first year, and the metric actually becomes worse 5 years out. Well, then you might be looking at this and saying, well, it's unfair to include the $7,300 that we're paying the interns as a recruiting cost, since hopefully those interns are adding some value. Well, okay, that's reasonable. And we can debate what the right allocation is. I assume 50% of that cost is real value that the intern is bringing from the work they're delivering over the course of the summer. And again, to be clear, in the same way, we can also point to the exclusion of other costs of having the interns. I didn't include anything like housing or events or t-shirts or dinner or time spent by managers. So again, this is just intended to be some directionally correct information. You can plug in your own. But irrespective, even if we allocate 50% of the value to the work and consider retention, the math still doesn't work. By the way, even if we exclude some of those other costs, again, because I'm a finance nerd, I wanted to see where we start hitting break even. You have to assume about 95% of the work the summer interns are doing is valuable before it even starts to hit break even. There's one last assumption or one last question we get. Those who would say, well, we're not spending the $6,000 NACE average to recruit our summer interns. We're spending less. There's not as many interviews or campus visits. And again, we can debate that, but even if we assume it's half the cost, assume it's $3,000, things are a bit better. We start to get close when we consider sort of 1-year retention. But as a CFO, I'm still not especially impressed, since I know we aren't probably considering all of the financial and time costs. So a young, happy, not bald Jeffrey looks at this and is probably a little bit less happy. And yes, a micro intern built this graphic for me. They thought we needed a smile given some of these numbers. So what do we do here? The first key action item for you: understand the key KPIs, the key performance indicators that matter to the C-suite. So while the pure metrics that we all think about, again, especially with NACE coming up, can help inform our tactics, again, things like conversion rate or volume or time, they don't protect our programs, they don't drive more budget, and they don't get us a seat at the table. And to be honest, some of those key metrics that do matter to the C-suite, especially on the numerator side, can be really difficult to measure, especially in the short term. Again, promotion velocity, time to productivity. But there are others that are pretty easy to find and actionable. Things where you can quickly show an improvement in retention or how you are able to drive down costs. And since cost is such a good place to start and so much easier, as a bonus, maybe a good place to start is to think about your intern conversion rate and how it impacts the cost per hire. And the best way to improve that cost isn't to pay your interns less, it's not to spend less on campus, it's to think about ways that you're selecting your summer interns. How can you improve that process? So let's get to the second topic. Once we understand where we are, what the C-suite next is thinking about, what needs to change. What are we doing to respond to what's taking place out there, including if we even need an early career program? Again, the rearview mirror is what it is. It's vital to know, but we can't change the past. And while I talked a lot about the numbers, when we look back, what's really important is to use those data to show a plan. How are your efforts helping the C-suite understand and respond to what's top of mind for them? Well, there's a lot. So one of the most common issues coming up is the shape of the future org chart. Historically, it's been a pyramid, as we all know. Should it remain that way? Should it be a diamond, an obelisk, a Penrose triangle, a tesseract? So Bank of New York and Microsoft have been working together on planning for an org chart in the future. And to be clear, it's not as simple as cutting headcount or just rewriting job specs. They're dealing with core issues and questions around the skills required for their new hires. Now, rather than just being a passenger, sort of when those discussions are taking place, BNY reshaped its entire early career program. They didn't throw out their internships or stop going to focus schools. Rather, they recognized that while those discussions were taking place, they realized that new hires weren't going to need to be just the typical finance majors. So they started to focus on finding creative ways to reach students who had those different skill sets to fit in the org design of the future. They also understood that they may not have the certainty of knowing their hiring needs 1, 2, 3, 4 years out. So they were creating flexible ways to have a bunch of candidates, I'm sorry, a bench of candidates, and not need to sort of renege on answers. So they could be responsive. Again, this is what matters to the executive committee there. And the early career team was able to show how they can help navigate those changes as BNY shifts from that diamond to that triangle. Another great example was with KPMG. Back in 2023, they announced a big initiative around an AI and digital innovation group. Now, this initiative, this announcement had nothing to do with early career hiring or TA or HR really at all, but the early career team understood that when this announcement was made, there could be larger implications. They understood that figuring out AI was a key imperative for the C-suite. They understood that there might be questions about the need for entry-level auditors. And that's really a key point. They had the ability to take this information, this data that was out there, and read the tea leaves so they could take action. What was also interesting to me was the response wasn't to stop hiring accounting majors and replace them all with programmers or stop going to campus. The response was to first understand what skills are going to be required for the auditors of the future and make sure they had the processes to effectively assess for those skills in their hiring and recruiting process. They also focused on how to help further develop the skills during the internship program. Now, when the leadership team is asking about the time to productivity of new hires or wonders if KPMG even needs entry-level auditors, the team is prepared. They're able to show not only how they were ahead of the curve in preparing, but they're also able to show how AI is actually improving the time to productivity of the new hires, improving the ROI of its interns. This is how you not only protect your program, but if you can show an increase in ROI, that's how you increase the program. So the action item. We started the discussion really focused on the denominator of ROI with the cost per hire. The two examples I just shared, they're much more focused on the numerator, the value created. So one of the things I'd suggest for this item is start with the fact that most leaders are focused on growth and improvements versus cost cutting. So go out there and find one area, one metric or priority that you think you can impact and put together that plan. Understand why it matters to the C-suite, where it is now, how you're going to address that dynamic. What are some of the expected results and next steps? Some places to start might be a news article, an SEC filing, an interview, something that tells you what the C-suite is thinking about, what's top of mind for the leaders and moves the needle. Then ask yourself how your efforts on the early career side are aligned. There might be direct areas, but there might be some indirect ones, like, again, the KPMG example. What can you do to make sure they're aligned? Again, a CEO announcing an AI effort. Are our recruiting processes effectively assessing the skills? To the McKinsey comment before, recognition that top talent wasn't just coming from the focus schools. How can we develop approaches to reach candidates while also keeping our costs in check? So beyond understanding where we are and where we need to go, the last big question the C-suite asks is, do we have the ability to respond, the systems and the mindset? This is always important, but I kind of want to double underline it right now because of how much change is taking place out there, whether it's because of AI, economics, uncertainty, other disruptions. People who have the ability to respond and take approaches that demonstrate flexibility are invaluable to organizations. So again, understanding the data and having a plan are important, but execution is required to be that true partner to make your programs and yourself invaluable. Now, one of the things I want to recognize is in early career programs, this is very, very, very difficult given some of the structural challenges, for lack of a better term. I think we know annual recruiting calendars are often defined by colleges or competitors, and they're locked in advance. We have 6- and 7-figure multi-year commitments to software and other investments. And to be clear, aren't intended to be negative. It's just the nature of the beast. A lot of our expenses are fixed. But most interestingly, the need to predict hiring months or years in advance has made things difficult. We know the needs are changing even within a given recruiting season. So while our hands might be somewhat tied, the head of TA, the CHRO, the CFO, the CEO, they don't care. So while some of these things can't be changed, our goal is to respond and respond in a way that doesn't require months of planning or years to get data or budget breaking costs and heavy lifts. There's other opportunities. So for example, one organization had a few different initiatives that align to several of the things we'll talk about. First, the CEO of this organization was a former college football player and was highly interested in recruiting more student athletes. The numbers weren't what he wanted. They believed that student athletes were invaluable to organizations. Again, something I think the data supports. Second, the sales team was growing rapidly, but the senior leaders on that team, the VP of sales or chief revenue officer, were complaining about the investment they were making in new hires who either left immediately after they were trained or onboarded, or as one of them said, pardon my directness, they just sucked. It just didn't pan out. There was no time. There was no ability to develop a plan that would take months to implement or require a massive increase in the size of their early career program or budget or timing. So again, back to that ROI framework. This is interesting because it impacts both the numerator and the denominator. The numerator tied to the strategic benefit of the organization hiring athletes and better quality sales professionals, and the denominator associated with the cost of hiring, especially with the turnover. Excuse me. So while I try to avoid talking about Parker Dewey during this, and this example, I will bring it up as a real example. What we essentially did was we created sales-related micro internships specifically targeting student athletes, projects that would drive interest and be accessible for the student athletes, like the CEO wanted, but would also provide a way for the chief revenue officer and the student, for that matter, to quickly assess fit before making that investment in onboarding. And I'm happy to share more of the details of this offline and walk through specific data and examples. But the key point is with a relatively small investment of money and time, the early career team was able to demonstrate the impact, their ability to respond to this challenge, if you will, from the executives, and it was sustainable. Not only when it comes to the can we hire student athletes challenge from the CEO or the cost per hire focus of the CFO, but also the quality of the hire and the will they stay challenge from the VP of sales. So here's the action item. Find a small bet you can make, something that shows your appreciation of the strategic goals, whether it's figuring out AI, shape of the org chart, or anything else. Something that allows you to demonstrate traction and progress. Something that also allows you to show respect for the ROI calculation that's in the mind of the CFO. Now, to be clear, you don't need to get it perfect. Show that you're working to help achieve those goals. Show that you're using data to demonstrate traction. Show that you're using data to enhance decisions. Again, show that respect for that ROI calculation. And if you want some place to start, again, I'm a bit biased, but think about the things that are top of mind for most of the executives that we talked about. Expenses, obviously, but also our ability to fill those difficult roles. Also questions about, are our new hires ready, both for today or, like McKinsey, for the next 10, 20, 30 years? What's the impact of AI on our business? So one of the accounting firms actually had all of these challenges. So we created a project for them that allowed them to show traction on all fronts. As students executed this audit process using AI, it was driving more interest from students not thinking about their firm or not thinking about accounting. The firm was also getting insights on if the students actually had the right skills for an increasingly AI-driven environment. It wasn't just knowing GAAP or knowing the tax code, but rather, do they have the judgment and communication and problem solving and empathy required in the future? And what was really also interesting to me is that the students were actually identifying more opportunities for this firm itself to leverage AI. It was almost like a consulting engagement because the students are on the ground thinking creatively and differently than the way we think. And back to where we started. This is powerful because it addressed both sides. Again, the numerator side of the ROI equation, improving the hiring outcomes, but also that denominator side showing really significant, effective sort of cost per hire. So it's a good segue to where do we go from here? First, it's about being introspective. Spend some time to understand the strategic goals of your organization, the inputs, what drives them, the metrics that help you demonstrate success to the leaders and that you can use to continue to enhance outcomes. And be thoughtful about understanding what are the strategic goals, what inputs do we need to change, and what activities are we taking to actually show that we're making those changes. And of course, I love talking about this stuff, as everyone knows. So I'm happy to spend time with any of you, not pitching Parker Dewey, though I'm always happy to do it, but rather walking through public data tied to your organization, best practices that we're seeing to really help you tease out some of the nuggets to help you identify what are those strategic priorities for the C-suite, to help you think about ways you can address them, to help think about some of those little bests, those small trials you can do, those things that can show traction, really brainstorming the metrics and best practices. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Again, feel free to use the little QR code on the right of the screen to schedule time with me, or if you're going to be at NACE, I would be happy to do it. But again, open it up to questions. So I see a question in here in the chat. Is it fair to say that conversion rate is too late of a measure to affect? Instead, focus on getting more summer interns to convert. You're saying we should spend more time upfront on improving who we hire to start with. 100% yes. 100%. And again, we talked about that 63% conversion rate. I love this question because I guess the immediate response is, well, the best way to convert is make our summer internship program more compelling. Do we need to give more t-shirts? Do we need to take them to more baseball games? Do we need to have more lunches and less work? That's actually not the right answer. First of all, it's not what the college students want. They want to actually get to know the organization so they can make the best decision, but that's also just adding to the costs. And it's not actually going to improve conversion rate. The best way to, again, have that input or have that impact is focus up front. Are you effectively assessing your college students, your candidates, to determine who are the right folks for the summer experience? And again, for anyone that's been around me long enough, you know, sort of, I use this analogy that a college student shared. Think about the summer internship like getting engaged, the full-time role like getting married. Think about that process before the engagement. Are you going on dates with them, or are you just swiping right or left through interviews, through info sessions, through super days and on-campus presentations? Again, those are all valuable, but the most effective way to sort of improve that selection process around the summer internships is to go on those dates, to actually see their skills that matter beyond the resume, beyond the interview, but also to give them insights into your organization. Because again, it's not just about you assessing their skills and determining that it's the right fit, back to that NACE metric. It's also about them saying yes. And a lot of college students will, again, take that summer internship, realize it's the wrong fit, maybe even the first week in, and that screws up the conversion metrics. Or, by the way, there's that echo effect of the fact that 55% of college students are leaving in the first year. So not only might they not convert, but you're also going to find issues with their ability to stay thereafter. What other questions do we have? Wow, silence from the chat. I know I talk too much. We got a question about best places define some of the information about strategic goals. I touched on this a bit. I showed a couple of examples that were pretty obvious. Again, press releases and news stories, like the KPMG and BNY one. One of the places I always go to is investor presentations, especially for public companies, because one of the things that you'll find from those investor presentations is what the C-suite is, again, telling public investors. We are trying to create an HR strategy to respond to a workforce of the future. That is a common thing. A common question that comes up is, do we need employees anymore because of AI? Or how come you're going to miss your earnings per share? Understanding those things is really valuable and will give you some great starting points. See a question here, advice for leadership that prefers referral-based internship program versus a more selective. Again, love that question, Kenny. Thank you. I don't think it needs to be mutually exclusive. Again, there's a whole bunch of data about referral programs that's really interesting to dig into. It's a pretty interesting rabbit hole. One of the things that we've suggested, and we see this all the time, not just with sort of referrals of individual interns, but even colleges. Again, the exec that wants you to go to their alma mater, even though it might not make the most sense for you to have that full on-campus presence, one of the things that we found is you can use sort of this dating metaphor I talked about before to be able to respond. Let's take that referral, and as opposed to immediately putting them into the internship program or full-time hire, let's give them a real project they can do for our organization. This can both help you assess them, but they may also determine it's not the right fit for you, and you're still being responsive to the CEO. And you're being responsive with real data. You don't have to go back and say, yeah, we didn't hire him or her because they didn't interview well or GPA. You're able to go back and say, we gave them a real experience and it's just not a great fit. Or it can help you find the individual where it is. The other thing we found is this sort of project-based or dating approach is really effective to change the mindset of hiring managers in general. Again, the hiring manager that thinks you have to be a 3.9 GPA from an Ivy League school with a econ major to do the job, again, you can change their mindset, not by forcing them to take summer interns or full-time hires from different programs, but letting them actually experience it through these short-term projects. Got another question. What do you think is the best way to evaluate critical thinking skills? Again, I am highly biased on this. I want to be clear, but I will go back to this example of the accounting project, the audit with AI. It's probably a little hard to see, and Melissa, I'm happy to share this with you offline or anyone else who asks. This is a perfect project to assess those critical thinking skills. What the project did is it asked the student to select a public company. So again, using public data, 10Ks and Qs, and basically go through the beginning of an audit process where they're using AI as a thought partner. In every step of the way, recording what prompts they're using, AI response, and then how the student is evaluating the AI response. They were able to create a deliverable that is, I think it's a few page presentation that a hiring manager or the HR team can look at in, call it, under 5 minutes and have a pretty good idea of if the student has those judgment skills, has those critical thinking. Are they able to take what was spit out by ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tool and understand where the risks are? What doesn't make sense? What might be a hallucination? And also, can they use it as a thought partner to get better? So can they take the data that was spit out and, again, not just understand right or wrong, but help them drive that flow of the audit process? We got another question. We're going less to schools and cut costs, and we started going into less schools and cutting costs, and we're still able to fill our seats this year. I hear what you're saying on conversion rate in the face of budget cuts. How can we convince leadership that there's more upfront action we need to take? Again, love that question. Thank you. I think one of the big ideas around that, or one of the big ways to do that, is to help the help the execs realize not everything requires a five or $10,000 on-campus visit. I think the way that and that's part of the problem, that a lot of the executives think the on-campus visits are just fun. They think it's getting to hang out with students and taking them to events and hanging out at the career fair tables. And all of us who have done that know that's not the case. Being able to show them other ways to make that investment. And again, I think I walked through some examples before. Being able to show them that it doesn't need to be, call it a huge investment up front. It could be an investment of a few dollars or 5 minutes will lead to those better outcomes, not just to fill the seats, but to make sure we're filling the right seats, or I'm sorry, filling the seats with the right people. There's another question. What is the best way to measure productivity when they're in full-time positions? To measure impact to the business contributions for the numerator. Let me go back to that prior slide so we can look at the numerator again for everyone's benefit. There's no one answer. And Derek, this is where I'm happy to work with you offline. Every organization is different. And again, there could be obvious things like how fast they're ramping, how fast they're hitting productivity. You could look at reviews. So are they performing when they're on the job? You could look at contribution in sales roles. You can look at things at how much revenue they're bringing in. But again, it really depends on the organization. Back to McKinsey, they're thinking about 20 years out. So the question are, what are those leading indicators during the first month, 3 months, 6 months that you can demonstrate to show that positive ROI? And even if you don't have the specific number, at least showing things that you believe are those leading indicators. Derek, I don't know if that perfectly answers your question. Again, it's so different for each company. Because again, part of the numerator, by the way, for Bank of New York was, is it helping us figure out that shape of the org chart of the future? That is a key part of the numerator. Part of the one for the accounting firm is it helping us figure out ways to use AI? Again, this is where it's so company specific. You're welcome, Derek. And again, happy to dig in with your specific company. It's also why I said at the beginning, to be blunt, the denominator side is much easier. I think, again, average cost per hire is $6,000 plus according to NACE. We have 55% first year turnover. We have a whole bunch of that money being spent on things that have questionable ROI. So does having certain swag at the career fair booth really drive better hires? I think there's a lot of opportunities. And again, the one that got me going down this whole path was that conversion rate. I think the biggest opportunity, one of the biggest opportunities right now to impact both the denominator, but also the numerator, though it may be a little harder to measure the numerator side, is can we make better decisions on who we bring into our summer internship program? And again, I will give a very personal example. I said I spent most of my career in finance and venture capital. Some of you may have noticed one of the companies listed sort of when I was showing me with hair was Coopers and Lybrand. Again, shows how old I am. One of the big six before it turned into the big four. I was an accounting and finance major. I got a summer internship at Coopers. The first week of my summer internship, I realized it wasn't the right fit for me. I realized I didn't want to be a public accountant. I didn't want to be an auditor. Again, I did all of the right stuff during my first 3 years in school, went to the info sessions, had the right conversations, but I didn't actually know it until I was on the job. I went through my 8 or 10 weeks there. I got my offer and I said no. Again, screwed up their conversion metrics. But what they also did was it was a lost opportunity. If there was a way for me to have done an accounting related project, spent a week, could have figured it out. It would have been a better outcome for me personally, but it's a prime way to improve Coopers back then, to improve that conversion rate, to improve that metric. So again, there's so many opportunities. And again, I'm obviously pretty passionate about this, so happy to work with any of you to help really tease out the ones that are most appropriate for your organization and situation. Any other questions? Well, with that, I will wrap up. Go back to the slide with the tables at the beginning of the deck. Uh, Jake, I'm happy to you. Can you tell me which tables you're most interested in? We will also share the presentation so you can see them. I just want to get you the right information. Oh, you just joined a little late. No problem. If there's a specific table or topic, again, happy to share it. It may have been the ROI table, which was on the slide right now. That's one of the key ones. We shared some data from NACE. We shared some data from Yellow and other sources showing where recruiters are spending time. So again, happy to dig through any of that. So with that, again, thank you so much for the time. For those of you who are going to be in Denver at NACE next week, would love to meet up, even if it's just to say hi. And again, I truly love this stuff. Hopefully that comes across. I love nerding out in the 10Ks. I love reading the investor presentations. I love digging through to try to figure out what's going to move the needle. It's fun for me. So please come to me with your challenge. Come to me with, again, even if it's a non-public company, there's enough stuff out there and enough stuff we've seen that we can probably give you some pretty good ideas of not only what's top of mind, but some low-hanging fruit. And I think that's really key. Again, back to one last thing I'll leave you with, back to some of the things we were talking about before, how hard it is for early career teams to move the needle because of the campus recruiting schedule, because of the fixed costs of software infrastructure, because of uncertain hiring needs. It seems difficult, but there's still low-hanging fruit out there. If you can slightly improve your intern selection process, the impact is enormous. If you can get ahead of the curve in assessing those skills, and skills-based hiring doesn't mean changing job descriptions. What it really means is identifying candidates, to the earlier question, who have the problem-solving communication skills. If you can get a bit ahead of the curve, if you can get a bit ahead of the curve and have a talent pipeline that's not just click, 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 applying to everything, but truly interested and qualified and engaged, that's ready to go when you need them, that's low-hanging fruit. That is an incredible way to chalk up some quick wins to protect the program, but also to demonstrate that strategic insight that gets you to the table, keeps you in the room when the decisions are being made, and makes you and the early career programs a vital part of the corporate strategy. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. This concludes the webinar. If anyone has questions, again, happy to talk offline.